They surrounded the disabled painter in the snow, tipping her wheelchair and laughing as she struggled to breathe in the freezing air. Her paint scattered, her hands bruised, and the world suddenly felt colder than winter itself. Then they reached for her fabric bag, ready to take the last pieces of her life, when a deep growl cut through the storm. Ranger, the loyal German shepherd who never left her side, stood between her and danger. But those thugs didn't fear him, not yet. They had no idea the footsteps racing down the icy path belonged to a Navy SEAL, Ethan Cole, who would bring a kind of justice they would never forget. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The winter door of Silver Ridge. The storm rolled across the Colorado mountains like a living beast, burying every sound beneath its roar. Hannah Brooks tightened her worn wool coat and stood in the center of her small log cabin, listening to the wind batter the shutters. At 26, she carried the quiet endurance of someone who had learned to survive with little. Her frame was slender, almost willowy, with pale skin that reddened easily in the cold. Long brown hair, usually tied back in a loose braid, brushed her shoulders tonight as she moved about the dim room. Her blue-gray eyes held a tension that rarely left her, a remnant of years spent alone after her father's death and her mother's departure soon after. Most evenings in Silver Ridge passed in silence, but this one felt heavier, as though the storm was pressing straight into her bones. She stirred the fire with a long metal poker, the only real weapon she owned, and debated whether to bar the door with the heavy beam leaning against the wall. Bad weather could bring desperate people, and the last time she trusted a stranger had cost her her savings and nearly her safety. The memory still crept along her spine whenever night fell too quickly. A sudden knock cut through the storm. She froze. The sound came again, 3 sharp blows swallowed halfway by the screaming wind. Hannah's breath hitched. Few people ever came this far up the mountain road, and none would knock in a blizzard unless something was terribly wrong. She gripped a thaw of fire poker with both hands and stepped toward the door, her heartbeat thudding against her ribs. "Who's there?" she called, her voice firmer than she felt. A muffled shout came through the wood, roughened by wind. "Please, ma'am, just a moment of shelter." She hesitated, then leaned toward the narrow frosted window. Through the swirling white, a dark shape hunched in the snow, broad-shouldered and heavy with ice. Something smaller, lower to the ground, pressed against his legs. Hannah swallowed. A man and a dog. She unlocked the peephole cover with trembling fingers and peered through. The figure leaned closer, revealing a man in his mid-30s wearing a torn field jacket over a soaked gray hoodie. Snow clung to his dark hair, cropped close at the sides, and a faint scruff shadowed his jaw. His face held a rugged, almost military hardness, the kind that came from long days without sleep, and longer years carrying things he never spoke about. His eyes, though, deep green and alert, held no threat, only exhaustion. Against his chest, half wrapped in his jacket, was a German shepherd. The dog's fur, black and tan, was thick but wet, his right hind leg tucked awkwardly beneath him. His ears twitched weakly. The dog looked young, but not quite a puppy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, still strong despite the cold. "Please," the man said again, louder this time. "My dog's hurt. We're losing heat." Her fingers tightened around the poker. "I don't let strangers into my house," she answered, the tremor in her voice betraying her fear, "especially not men." There was a pause, long enough for the storm to fill the silence. Then he spoke with a quieter tone, one shaped by sincerity rather than force. "I understand. My name's Cole Dawson. I'm a Navy SEAL. Well, used to be. We were trying to get through the pass before the storm closed in. My truck skidded off the road. Ranger, my dog, took the worst of the fall. We just need warmth. One night." Hannah stared at him, the wind howling behind his silhouette. Navy SEAL. She had heard stories of men shaped by war into steel, men who carried scars inside them like hidden shrapnel. This one looked like he had more than his share. Ranger let out a small, strained whine. That sound pierced something in her. It reminded her of the injured strays she used to help as a child, back when her father was alive and life felt safer. She could ignore men. She could not ignore a suffering dog. With a shaky exhale, she unlatched the door. Snow blasted inside the cabin, icy and ferocious. Cole stepped forward, but not fully inside, waiting as though he expected her to change her mind. "Come in," she muttered, stepping back. "Quickly." "Thank you," he said, his voice raw with relief. He crouched and carefully lifted Ranger into his arms before crossing the threshold. The moment the heat of the fire reached them, steam rose from their clothes. Hannah shut the door with a heavy thud, locking it behind them, though she kept the poker close. Cole knelt by the fireplace, easing Ranger onto the old rug. Up close, Ranger's injury was clearer. A deep scrape along his leg, the fur matted with half-frozen blood. Hannah's breath softened. "He needs warmth first," she said, kneeling just far enough to keep distance. "Then water." Cole nodded, his hands gentle as he rubbed Ranger's side to stimulate heat. He looked different in the firelight, less intimidating, more human. The lines around his eyes, carved by years of strain, deepened in a way that spoke of tiredness rather than danger. "You live out here alone?" he asked quietly. "For years," she replied. "People leave you alone when you're this far up." "That why you opened the door with a weapon?" His tone wasn't mocking, almost understanding. "The last time I trusted someone," she said, eyes darkening, "I learned not to." He didn't press for details. Instead, he removed his soaked gloves and placed his hand on Ranger's chest. The dog lifted his head weakly, nudging Cole's fingers. "He'll be okay," Cole murmured, more to reassure himself than her. Hannah grabbed a folded blanket from the shelf and hesitated before handing it over. Cole accepted it with quiet gratitude, wrapping Ranger gently. For a long moment, the three of them remained near the fire, Hannah cautious, Cole exhausted, Ranger shivering under the quilt's warmth. Outside, the storm wailed like a restless spirit. Inside, the small cabin held a fragile, uncertain peace, one built on instinct, fear, and a flicker of trust neither of them expected to share. Tonight, the blizzard had forced two lives together. By morning, neither would be the same. The fire between three hearts. The storm pressed harder against the cabin through the long mountain night, rattling the shutters like bones clacking in the wind. The fire, bright but unsteady, cast waves of orange light across the small room, where three lives hovered between caution and reluctant comfort. Hannah Brooks knelt beside the hearth, her slim hands steady as she poured hot ginger tea into two mismatched ceramic mugs. The steam curled upward, mixing with the scent of pine logs and the lingering cold clinging to Cole Dawson's soaked clothes. Her braid, loosened by the heat, fell slightly over her shoulder as she moved. She brushed it back with an unconscious gesture, revealing the tired lines beneath her blue-gray eyes. Lines that spoke of nights spent working multiple jobs in town and years of living alone without anyone to watch her back. Behind her, Ranger breathed in shallow but stable rhythms beneath the blanket she had wrapped around him. The German shepherd's ears twitched when she approached, his dark eyes opening just enough to follow her movement. There was trust there, fragile but unmistakable. Cole Dawson sat cross-legged beside Ranger, his broad frame silhouetted by the fire. In the glow, the ruggedness of his face softened. His jaw, dusted with a day's worth of stubble, no longer looked hardened by battle, but worn by exhaustion. A faint scar, thin and pale, ran along his left cheek, the kind earned not by carelessness, but by a moment that could have ended differently. He lifted his head when Hannah offered the mug. "Thank you," he murmured, voice low, shaped by years of barking orders through wind, sand, and gunfire. She sat across from him, placing her own mug between her palms. "You should drink. Your lips are turning blue." Cole gave something close to a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You sound like the medics I used to ignore." "I'm not a medic," she replied, "just someone who doesn't want a half-frozen soldier collapsing on her floor." He chuckled softly, short, surprised, before sipping the tea. Silence settled again, not tense but cautious. Outside, the wind wailed. Inside, the fire crackled like a heartbeat. Cole shifted closer to Ranger, resting a steady hand on the dog's side. "He's strong, but the cold. He isn't built for this long out." Hannah nodded, studying the dog's injured leg. "Do you have anything in your bag to treat him?" Cole reached for the tactical pack he had dropped earlier. It was worn, the fabric faded, the straps frayed in places. A pack that had seen deserts, jungles, and mountains. From it, he pulled a small kit of sterile gauze, tape, and a metal tin of salve. "You carry this everywhere?" she asked. "When you've watched teammates bleed out far from help," he said quietly, "you learn to be ready for anything." His eyes shifted to the fire as though seeing something far beyond it. Hannah noticed the change, how his shoulders tightened, how his voice thinned under the weight of memory. Whatever ghosts followed him, they were not gentle ones. She didn't ask. Instead, she moved closer and placed another blanket beside Ranger. Cole blinked, as if being pulled back from a distant battlefield. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to drift." "It's fine," Hannah replied softly. "Everyone drifts somewhere, especially in storms." He wrapped the gauze with careful skill, his fingers steady despite the cold. Ranger whimpered once, then nudged Cole's wrist with his nose. "He saved me," Cole said after a moment, still focused on the bandage. "3 months ago, training op in Wyoming, ice shelf cracked under us. Ranger pushed me aside, fell halfway through himself." He let out a breath. "I pulled him out, but he hasn't been the same since." Hannah watched the two with a softness she rarely showed. "He's loyal. That kind of loyalty is earned." Cole finally looked up, his green eyes meeting hers. "And you opening that door tonight, most people wouldn't have done that." She shrugged, though her cheeks warm from more than the fire. Ranger needed help. That was enough. "And me?" Cole asked, half teasing, half serious. "You looked half frozen," she said. He huffed a quiet laugh. "I've been worse." They drank their tea in companionable silence. The fire warmed the room slowly, pushing back the chill until the dripping from Cole's clothes stopped and the windows fogged from the heat. Eventually, Hannah rose and went to the small kitchen corner to refill the kettle. She lit a lantern, revealing the wooden shelves she had built herself, filled with jars of dried herbs, honey, flour, and a few canned goods, her entire winter supply. "Storm won't lift tonight," Cole said, watching her. "I can hear how it hits the cabin. We won't be able to move until morning." "I figured," she replied, setting the kettle on the stove. "The power line went down earlier. You'll need to stay." Cole nodded with gratitude he didn't voice. Ranger, feeling warmer now, shifted and laid his head on Hannah's knee when she sat down again. The gesture startled her at first, but she slowly placed a hand on his fur. The dog's breathing changed, softer, calmer. "He likes you," Cole said. "I didn't do anything." "You opened the door." Hannah didn't answer. Instead, she looked into the fire, letting the warmth sink into her bones. She hadn't shared her space with anyone in years. The presence of a man and a dog, breathing, alive, grateful, felt strange, but not unwelcome. Outside, the storm continued its assault, erasing all roads and paths beneath blankets of snow. Inside, 3 souls settled into a rare stillness, Ranger sleeping lightly, Cole leaning against the log wall with his eyes half closed, and Hannah watching the flames as though they held the answers to questions she had never said aloud. For tonight, danger had not found her door. Only a wounded soldier, his loyal dog, and a faint, growing sense that this storm had brought them together for a reason she could not yet understand. The mountain storm and the unfinished goodbye. By morning, the storm had softened, but not surrendered. Snow still clung to the pines in heavy white coils, and a thin sheet of frost covered the cabin roof like glass. Inside, the fire from the night before had burned low, glowing faintly beneath a bed of embers. Cole Dawson stepped into his boots with a quiet determination that came naturally to a man who had spent years waking before dawn. The lines around his eyes looked less carved today, softened by warmth, sleep, and the fragile comfort of a roof that did not leak and a dog that rested safely at his side. Ranger, though still injured, had enough strength to lift his head when Cole crouched beside him. The German shepherd's ears flicked, and he let out a soft huff, tail thumping weakly on the wool rug. Cole smiled, a small, rare thing that lifted one corner of his mouth and revealed a gentleness hidden beneath the soldier's hardened shell. "You're getting there, buddy," he murmured, scratching behind Ranger's ear. At the sound of movement, Hannah Brooks emerged from the tiny hallway, tightening the belt of her wool robe. Her brown hair was slightly tangled from sleep, her braid half undone, and her face still carried the warmth of the firelight she must have slept beside. For a moment, she looked almost startled to find the two still there, a quiet fear lingering, as if she half expected the storm to take them away before she woke. "How's his leg?" she asked, voice soft from sleep. "Better," Cole replied. "Not perfect, but better." She knelt beside the dog, her fingers moving carefully along Ranger's side. Ranger nudged her palm, and a small smile tugged at her lips. "He's a good boy," she said. Cole glanced at her, and something unreadable flickered in his expression. Respect, gratitude, maybe even a faint ache he wasn't sure what to do with. The morning passed with simple tasks that filled the cabin with the comfortable rhythm of shared effort. Cole repaired the loose hinge on the front door, each sharp hit of his hammer echoing through the cold air. Hannah pulled quilts onto the line outside, the wind lifting the fabric like wings. Together they prepared a pot of chicken soup, the scent of garlic and thyme weaving through the warm cabin. As the day stretched on, The wind calmed and the sky cleared into a pale, cold blue. Ranger grew more alert, sitting up for longer stretches, even giving an unsteady wag of his tail when Hannah placed another log into the fire. "I haven't seen him that lively since Wyoming," Cole said, watching his partner with quiet pride. "Guess good company works miracles." Hannah flushed, but said nothing, busying herself with folding towels near the hearth. Cole stepped outside with an armful of chopped firewood. The air bit at his cheeks, but he welcomed the cold. It reminded him he was still here, still breathing, still capable of building instead of destroying. As he stacked the wood neatly onto the pile, he paused, looking at the mountains rising beyond the tree line. Their peaks glistened white under the winter sun, stark and endless. He knew what he had to do. Inside, Hannah pulled on her thick coat, preparing for the short walk down the mountain to the small general store where she worked part-time. She stood near the door, glancing back at the warm interior, at the man working silently outside, and the dog sleeping peacefully by the fire. "You'll be here when I get back?" she asked, unable to hide the hopeful note in her voice. Cole brushed snow from his shoulders as he came inside. He hesitated, just for a second, before nodding. "We'll still be here." Hannah let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She opened the door and stepped into the cold afternoon. "I won't be long." Cole watched her go, the wind tugging at the ends of her coat, her figure growing smaller against the white path. Something pulled at him, a quiet longing he wasn't prepared for. Ranger whined softly, as if sensing the shift in his handler's thoughts. "I know," Cole whispered, kneeling beside him, "but we can't stay." The hours that followed passed with an unsettling stillness. The cabin warmed, Ranger slept comfortably, but Cole paced the small room, torn between gratitude and the heavy instinct to leave before he disrupted a life that wasn't his. Before the storm, he had been alone. He had lived with silence long enough to know it too well. And men like him, men shaped by violence, by missions never discussed, by dangers that carved themselves into bone, did not get to want quiet cabins or gentle kindness. By the time the sky turned orange, he had made his choice. He packed quietly, methodically. Ranger rose to his feet, limping slightly, but determined. Cole tied the blanket around the dog's shoulders, making sure his leg was secure. On the table, he placed two things: a short handwritten note of thanks and his metal dog tag, scratched, worn, the last piece of identity he carried from the brotherhood he'd bled for. It was not a gift he gave lightly. It was trust and apology and farewell. He looked around the cabin one last time, the fire glowing softly, the blanket Hannah had wrapped around Ranger, the half-folded towels she'd left by the hearth. "Let's go," he whispered, and the door closed behind them. When Hannah returned, cheeks flushed from the cold and hands stiff from carrying supplies, she stepped inside with a small smile. "Cole, Ranger, I got—" The words snagged in her throat. The cabin was clean, warm, silent. The note on the table fluttered slightly from the draft she'd let in. The dog tag glinted in the firelight. She reached for it with trembling fingers, her heart dropping as though something had been pulled from her chest. All the warmth they had built over 2 days seemed to collapse into a hollow ache. There was no goodbye, just absence, and the echo of footsteps long gone. Yet as she held the tag in her palm, Hannah felt something stir, a mix of sadness, confusion, and an unfamiliar thread of hope. Because men did not leave symbols like this unless they meant something, unless the story between them wasn't over. The invitation in the mountain city of Denver. 3 weeks passed, and winter showed no mercy. The morning sun over Silver Ridge shone pale and brittle, as though even the light was struggling to survive the cold. Hannah Brooks wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck as she trudged through town, her boots leaving thin impressions in the half-melted snow. The mountain chill seeped into everything these days, her cabin, her bones, and, most of all, her thoughts. She had lost her job at the general store a week earlier. A quiet apology from Mr. Hensley, the old man who owned the shop, had done little to soften the blow. Mr. Hensley was a thin, silver-haired gentleman in his 70s, his posture slightly stooped, and his soft brown eyes always heavy with worry. He had looked devastated when he told her the truth. "We can't afford winter staff this year, Hannah, not with the supply truck stuck and the storm damage. I'm so sorry." She had forced a small smile to make it easier for him, though inside something had cracked. Her hours at the bakery had already been reduced after the roof leak forced them to close half their kitchen. Her savings were shrinking as quickly as the firewood pile behind her cabin. That night, she sat curled near the hearth, hugging her knees to her chest, staring at the metal dog tag Cole had left behind. She held it often these days, as if the cold metal could somehow warm the hollowness inside her. She didn't expect anything to change, certainly not the letter that arrived 2 days later. It came in a crisp white envelope, the type used by banks or institutions. Her name was written neatly across the front. The return address read, Rocky Defense K-9, Denver Division Director. Commander Cole Dawson. Her heart stopped. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. Inside was a formal invitation, polite, professional, and yet strangely personal beneath the printed lines. We are pleased to invite you to interview for the position of Program Coordinator for our Veterans in Khan Reintegration Initiative. Your character, resilience, and demonstrated compassion have been personally noted by Commander Dawson. Transportation has been arranged. Your presence is requested at our Denver headquarters at the time below. Hannah lowered the paper, her pulse hammering. Cole had found her, and more than that, he had recommended her. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she doubted the offer, though part of her feared it was a mistake, but because something warmed inside her for the first time in weeks. Hope. Denver greeted her with towering glass buildings reflecting the pale winter sky. Hannah stepped off the shuttle in front of a sleek, modern tower whose mirrored windows seemed to cut into the clouds. Her breath fogged in the air as she clutched the strap of her worn canvas bag, feeling small among the polished shoes and navy coats of people hurrying by. Inside, the lobby soared upward with marble floors and a sculpture shaped like a canine paw embedded in a bronze star. A receptionist approached, a woman in her early 30s with warm tan skin, chestnut hair in a neat twist, and sharp hazel eyes behind thin glasses. She wore a charcoal gray suit that fit perfectly, radiating quiet competence. "Good morning. You must be Miss Brooks," she said with a professional but kind smile. "I'm Sarah Lynn, Administrative Officer for the Denver unit. Commander Dawson is expecting you." Sarah's voice was calm and steady, the kind of person who brought order into any room she entered. Hannah followed her past glass partitions and conference rooms, filled with people in tactical uniforms and others in business attire. The space buzzed with purpose, a blend of discipline and compassion that felt strangely comforting. They reached an elevator, and Sarah scanned her badge. 32nd floor, she said. "He insisted on meeting you personally." Hannah's stomach knotted. When the elevator doors opened, the atmosphere changed. The halls were quieter, lined with framed photos of veterans and their canine partners. Dogs leaping through snow, soldiers kneeling beside their companions, men and women standing proudly in uniforms. Each plaque carried a story of survival and loyalty. At the end of the hall stood an office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Denver's skyline. Sarah opened the door. Inside, Cole Dawson stood near the window, his posture tall and composed in a crisp navy blue uniform. Medals gleamed across his chest, symbols of service, sacrifice, and a past that had shaped him into the man she had seen only glimpses of in the cabin. His hair was neatly trimmed now, the dark stubble replaced by a clean shave. Yet his green eyes, sharp, steady, and strangely gentle, were exactly as she remembered. "Hi, Hannah," he said, his voice softer than she expected. She stood frozen a moment before whispering, "Cole." Before she could say more, a familiar bark echoed from behind his desk. Ranger limped forward, healed enough that the limp was now faint, and pressed his head against her hand with a joyful whine. His tail wagged, sweeping the floor wildly. Hannah laughed, the sound breaking the tension in her chest. "Hey, boy, you remember me?" Cole stepped closer, watching them with something warm in his expression. "He doesn't forget kindness." Hannah rose, meeting his gaze. "You started an entire program," she said quietly. "Because of one night?" Cole shook his head lightly. "No. I started it because I spent years watching veterans fall through the cracks after giving everything. But that night," he paused, breath visible in the light. "You reminded me what compassion looks like when it's real. You didn't owe us anything, and still, you opened your door." He handed her a folder. Inside were outlines, budgets, plans, months of work. "You have something I don't," Cole continued. "Patience, understanding, a way of seeing people beyond what's broken. I want you to be the heart of this project." Her eyes stung. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering purpose. "Cole," she said softly, I don't know what to say." "You already said it," he replied. "Back in Silver Ridge, when you let us in." The room fell into a quiet so profound, Hannah felt her breath slow, her heartbeat settle. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, peaceful, nothing like the storm that had once brought them together. Now, it felt like a beginning. The door opens once more. Winter returned to the Rockies with a quieter kind of cold, the kind that lay gently on rooftops and softened the outline of every pine tree. A year had passed since the stormy night that first bound three wandering souls together. Now, as snow sifted through the morning light, Hannah Brooks walked down the polished hallway of the Rocky Defense Canine Center with a sense of belonging she had never expected to find. She had grown in confidence since the day she stepped into the Denver Tower, her posture straighter, her eyes clearer. Her long brown hair was tied into a neat ponytail, and the simple navy sweater she wore matched the calm steadiness she had developed while coordinating veteran outreach, canine placement, and emergency response training. She had learned how to navigate meetings, comfort withdrawn soldiers, and even help assess dogs for field rehabilitation. Beside her padded the unmistakable steps of Ranger. The German Shepherd, now fully healed, had regained his proud bearing. His thick coat gleamed in layers of tan and charcoal, and the scar near his hind leg had faded into a faint line. At 5 years old, he was in his prime, attentive and fiercely loyal. His amber eyes tracked Hannah with a protectiveness that had deepened since the first night he curled up beside her on a cold Tipton floor. And waiting for both of them at the end of the hall was Cole Dawson. Cole carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had spent his life serving others, yet the sharpness of his military edges had softened in the 12 months they had worked together. His dark hair had grown slightly longer, his jawline still strong but no longer shadowed with fatigue. Today he wore a simple forest green jacket and worn jeans, the off-duty clothes that made him look more human, less commander. "You ready for the weekend?" he asked with a small smile, one that still had the power to catch Hannah off guard. She nodded, adjusting the strap of her travel bag. "As ready as I'll ever be." Ranger barked softly, tail brushing her leg like an impatient nudge. Cole chuckled. "He's the most excited out of all of us. I think he's been waiting for this trip longer than we have." They walked out to the truck, an old but reliable navy blue pickup with snow chains already fitted onto the tires. Cole opened the door for Hannah, a gesture so simple yet steady that it had become part of their quiet routine. The drive towards Silver Ridge wound through mountain roads framed by frosted pines and steep cliffs. Hannah watched the scenery blur by, but her thoughts drifted inward, toward laughter shared in late-night planning sessions, lunches eaten on the center's front steps with Ranger's head wedged between them, and evenings when Cole walked her to her car after long meetings with a softness in his eyes he never named. Working with him had changed her life. Working with her had changed his. Near midday, the town's familiar outline appeared. Wooden storefronts, narrow roads, and chimneys releasing thin streams of smoke into the winter sky. But it wasn't the town that made her breath catch. It was the cabin waiting at the top of the ridge. The structure stood just as she remembered it, yet somehow warmer now. Cole had repaired the roof months earlier with the help of a veteran named Mark Willis, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with sandy hair, a trimmed beard, and a gentle demeanor shaped by years of search and rescue missions. Mark's handiwork showed in the neatly aligned shingles and the reinforced porch beams. Hannah had appreciated his kindness the few times she met him. He always spoke softly, his deep-set green eyes full of understanding. Cole parked the truck, and the three of them stepped out. The air was sharp but clean, the kind of cold that stung briefly before settling into something refreshing. Hannah's breath curled into the air. Memories flooded back, the storm, the fear, the door creaking open, and the two strangers who had walked into her life. "Feels different now," Cole said quietly beside her. "It does," she murmured. Ranger trotted ahead, his paws kicking up soft sprays of powder as he circled the cabin in excited loops. His tail wagged so fiercely it brushed snow from the steps. Cole motioned for Hannah to join him at the porch. As she stepped onto the wooden boards, a familiar creak echoed under her boots. She looked down and smiled. That sound had once frightened her. Now it felt like a welcome. "Before we go in," Cole said, turning toward her, "there's something I've been meaning to do." Her heartbeat skipped. He reached into his coat pocket and then, to her astonishment, knelt down on the very step where she had first seen him, shivering in a blizzard. The soft crunch of snow under his knee was the only sound in the quiet mountain air. Hannah stared, breath caught in her chest. Cole lifted a simple silver bracelet, elegant and unadorned except for the engraved line on the inside, for the one who opened the door. Her eyes stung with warmth. Cole's voice was steadier than his trembling hands. I spent years believing I wasn't meant for anything beyond the battlefield. Ranger kept me alive, but you, he swallowed hard. You gave us shelter when we had nothing left. You saw us as human. That changed everything. Ranger patted over and pressed his head against Hannah's leg, eyes bright and earnest, as if urging her to answer. I'm not promising perfection, Cole continued, but I'm promising honesty, loyalty, and a home that we build together, however long it takes. Hannah felt her heart unfold, slowly, warmly, like a door she had kept locked far too long. She nodded. Then she sank to her knees, wrapping one arm around Ranger and the other around Cole, holding both as the cold wind swirled gently around them. The cabin behind them waited, with its old wooden walls and its small hearth. The place where fear had once lived now felt like the beginning of something safe, something right. To open the door again was no longer an act of caution. It was an act of love. And this time, she opened it not for strangers, but for her family. Final message, English. Some doors in life open because we choose them. Others open because something greater nudges us forward. Hannah never asked for a storm. Cole never expected a safe place to appear in the middle of the mountains. And Ranger, with his loyal heart, only knew the warmth of the hand that reached out to him. But sometimes, in the coldest hours, God threads lives together in ways we don't see until much later. A cabin light in the dark, a knock no one was expecting, a simple act of kindness that becomes a turning point. Maybe the real miracle is how ordinary people find each other at the exact moment they need it most. And as you return to your own day, your home, your worries, your small hopes, I pray a quiet blessing follows you. May God open the right doors for you, guide your steps, and place the right people by your side when the road feels long. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need a reminder that grace can arrive in the middle of any storm. Leave a comment, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, hope, and quiet miracles. May God bless you and keep you tonight, and may every door you open lead to warmth.